The Leafs dominate Columbus and come away with the win. Welcome into Rinkwide Toronto, sponsored by Bodog, free casino games and sports odds. It is time to play at Bodog.net. Rob Wong joined alongside by David Alter, comes to us from Scotiabank Arena, where the Maple Leafs defeated the Blue Jackets 4-2 in a game that, you know, you look at the scoreboard and it's a 2-goal win, 4 goals, and you're thinking, okay, not too bad. I think the Maple Leafs could have scored 10 goals in this game, Dave, if it were not for Jet Greaves, the rookie goaltender for the Columbus Blue Jackets, who made 46 saves in this one. He was definitely pressed into duty tonight in front of friends and family, the Cambridge native, just with an impressive performance considering the situation. But overall, if you're the Leafs, you're very happy with this one because it's a big 2 points. I know they, still have the lead on Tampa Bay here for home ice advantage, but if they lose this game or don't come away with any points, then things get a little bit more interesting down the final 5 games here between the Maple Leafs and the Lightning. But overall, a performance where the Maple Leafs definitely had the run of the play and deservedly come away with the 4-2.
Yeah, these are the type of games where when it's a team at the bottom of the standings, the Leafs have kind of had that issue of trying to get up and play to a standard of if it was a desperate opponent, right? Like someone who's kind of bringing their A game. So you don't want to get into this false sense of security and then everything kind of goes into this lull. But the Leafs brought on the firepower throughout the whole game. The depth was certainly the story here, with the bottom 6 perhaps playing better than the top 6 when you look at it. I think you got to learn a lot about some of the other guys who are kind of fighting for spots in the playoff positions there at the forward spot, including Zach Aston-Reese. So as Ryan O'Reilly comes back and they kind of have to decide what's the optimal look here, there's a bit of an obvious kind of situation. Obviously, Nick Abruzzese is probably the guy who kind of comes out, but if they did an 11-7, Zach Aston-Reese was kind of on the bubble. When they tried that the first time, Zach Aston-Reese was the guy who sat. And, since the trade deadline, he's been pretty good in that regard and starting to find his groove and just really kind of getting into that game. So, I mean, his production tonight kind of sums up the story. The Leafs were able to get firepower everywhere. It was close. Personally, I would have liked to see a Michael Hutchinson revenge game tonight, but good for Jet Greaves. Good for him. Like, that's always a fun story too. NHL debut, and you're from not too far away in Cambridge. So, pretty good. 30, make that a 46 save performance for Jet Greaves. And so, interesting enough, a good, solid, close win, something that the Leafs, kind of needed to kind of show that against these type of opponents, they're not rolling over.
Yeah, absolutely. That's always, like you said, been a concern all season long for the Leafs when they play these bottom feeder teams. Are they going to be able to step up their game? And that definitely was the case tonight. And as you mentioned, Zach Aston-Reese with a pair of goals. We'll get to him coming up in just a bit here, but let's kick things off from head coach Sheldon Keefe, who talked about what he saw in this one.
It's a challenging game here tonight, right? Like, we have the puck a lot. We're getting lots of shots, getting lots of chances, yet it's close. It's a close game, and you still have to be really smart and really disciplined defensively. But I think ultimately this is really kind of a perfect game for us in a lot of ways, that we had the puck a lot, we're in control of the game, yet it's still keeping us honest and keeping us playing with the mindset that's going to be required here the rest of the way.
Yeah, and I definitely got that sense too. I mean, despite the fact that Columbus was really not generating much offense tonight, Dave, they definitely played pretty hard. I mean, they were pretty physical tonight, I thought, against the Leafs, especially against, some of the top stars on this team. And, it's not ideal, of course. You don't want to see, William Nylander or John Tavares, Mitch Marner, Austin Matthews get, run into a lot in the final 5 games of the regular season. But, it sort of had that physicality element that, as we know, come the first round, it's going to be very evident, especially with a team like the Tampa Bay Lightning. So, it was good to see that the Leafs, had to kind of fight through a little bit of physicality in this one against the Columbus Blue Jackets. But, as Sheldon Keefe mentioned as well, this is the type of game that he likes to play, the puck possession, where it's not just, you're holding onto the puck and you're not doing anything with it. You're generating shots. You're generating high danger chances. The Leafs had 19 high danger chances at 5-on-5, 27 7 overall in the game. So if you could script it up, of course, this is what Sheldon Keefe would want. But then again, it's also the Columbus Blue Jackets. I doubt Tampa Bay is going to be allowing 27 high danger chances too often in a playoff series.
No, and so, I mean, when you look at the shot disparity, it's almost kind of in line with the hit disparity. That's 40 hits from the Columbus Blue Jackets tonight, right? So 7 from Sean Corrali, 6 from Boone Jenner. And what the Leafs showed is not only can they push back with that physicality, but they didn't need someone like a Luke Schenn to kind of keep the game honest either, right? Like as they're kind of trying to figure out what the ideal 6 is, they get Timothy Liljegren into that spot. It's been a long time since Timothy Liljegren's played in a game where he is the 6 and not the 7. And so for him to kind of get in here and have an okay game, not too much of a liability there, and the Leafs can show that even though the game's close, they have other guys who are stepping up to kind of deliver the hits. Jake McCabe had 6, so it certainly looked like he kind of stepped it up in that regard when someone like a Luke Schenn wasn't out there. So, it shows that there's different kind of ways the Leafs can kind of deploy things and figure out what's right. And I don't know if they're any closer to that answer after tonight. It's going to be really, really interesting, to kind of see where things go. But, they added all these pieces, and slowly but surely it looks like, guys are kind of getting aligned and the combinations are being set where, this was the first time that Riley and Brody played together, as a defense pair since mid-March. And to see some of these familiar pairs back again as they kind of finalize things, I think is a good thing, especially for someone like Morgan. So it'll be interesting to see what they kind of stick with going into Boston. Some of these tougher opponents coming up as the road trip kind of comes up here and then the season ends is going to be very telling about what the Leafs are going to look like come playoff time.
So, of course, everybody wondering at this point, when you know Tampa Bay is your opponent, what's really left to play for? But Austin Matthews, who scored an empty netter in this one, says even though they know it's going to be Tampa in the first round, there's still plenty of things to work on.
I think it's always you're a little antsy this time of year, and especially when you already know who you're playing and all that. But we still have a lot to play for, obviously, with trying to gain the home ice advantage and stuff. So we definitely want to utilize these last 4 or 5 games to just dial in our game and make sure we're focused on all the little details that really count, especially come playoff time.
I mean, you think it's tough for the Leafs, considering they know who they're playing. I mean, imagine being Boston, where you've been locked in first place with home ice advantage, and you're just going to take on whoever the wild card position is. So, it's different for every team and different for every situation. But, for the Leafs, as you said, there's still a lot of things to figure out when it comes to the different line combinations, and we'll get into that coming up in a moment, of course, with the line of Mitch Marner, Willie Nylander, and John Tavares. But, Austin Matthews is saying right there, it's, we've got 5 games left still, some things to figure out, and you want to be playing at your best, right? You don't want to just be coasting in to the first round. There's always that discussion, is it better to be, clawing and scratching your way into the playoffs, or do you want to be well rested and kind of just cruising your way into the first round? I guess, different strokes for different folks.
Yeah, it's a difficult balance. We've talked about it for the last couple of weeks or so when Toronto hadn't clinched yet, but all the mathematical indicators suggested it was going to be Toronto and Tampa. I remember seeing a tweet earlier today that I think Toronto and Tampa have been pretty much projected at second and third by all statistical models since November, which is kind of insane. Just kind of speaking to kind of that format. So when you look at things there and you're constantly looking at the standings and you're seeing Toronto and Tampa, it's like, okay, well, you kind of have to establish your game and play well. But yeah, you got to preserve yourself. It's a really, really difficult and tricky balance here. The Leafs are kind of finding that right now with Ryan O'Reilly, right? Like there were indications that possibly someone like him was going to come back in this game, but they're just being super cautious. Like, cause you want to give it your all. You want to have a higher standard of play. But if there's situations where it doesn't make sense to kind of throw everything at it and be at your most optimal, then you don't do it. So, it's a tough one. And, when Toronto was kind of going through their struggles a little bit, so was Tampa. And so it's kind of easy to be like, well, they're also kind of like that. Well, now Tampa's kind of kicked it up into another gear. So I think that was good for Toronto because that shows that there is a bit of a spark there and they kind of have to get their act together too if they want to measure up pretty well.
Yeah, 100%. They know what's at stake in the first round, and they have played these guys before, so they know what to expect come game one against the Tampa Bay Lightning. Meanwhile, Joseph Woll, really solid in this one, 24 saves. Of course, the news from earlier today that Matt Murray is going to be out. He's dealing with head coach Sheldon Keefe said was a head injury, did not use the C word, did not want to go, I guess, that far to confirm it. But, I mean, aside from, I guess, some other sort of head injury, I think that's where everybody is kind of thinking when it comes to Matt Murray, who's had a history of concussions before. So it is unfortunate that could be the case for the Maple Leafs netminder. But Joseph Woll says he has to stay prepared no matter the situation.
My plan for this year was just to be ready whenever I'm called, and regardless of what happens, I try my best to stay ready for opportunity. And obviously for Matt, I hope he is back as soon as he can be.
And I think that's really been one of the more impressive parts about Joseph Woll this year, Dave, that anytime he's been called on, whether it's been a short layoff, a long layoff, I mean, he's been excellent. And I know all the opponents that he's had maybe haven't been, the elite of the elite in the NHL, but for a guy that's, still very young in his NHL career, coming into a team with expectations, I don't think you could have asked anything more from, a guy that started as, I guess, the fourth goalie on the depth chart and has now worked his way up to the current backup for the Toronto Maple Leafs.
He's credited two reasons for why he's had the year that he's had, both with the Leafs and the Marlies. One is the extended off season from injury has kind of allowed him to kind of retool some things technically in his game. But the second one, and we've talked about this in the past when he's been up, is that he stayed off social media, made a point to do that, and just kind of keeps like a small little group chat for, keeping on top of friends he wants to stay connected with and things he wants to be connected with that way. Outside of that, all the noise is blocked out to the point where when he showed up earlier in the season, and this was just days after, or a couple days after the Leafs acquired Ryan O'Reilly and Noel Acciari, he was completely out of the loop on it. He walked into the room and said, "What the heck happened to our line?" So when he looked at the line board for the day, it's unbelievable that that's how focused and kind of just within himself that he is right now. And I think that's been key, which is why he's able to kind of go up or down and treats it like nothing. It's the same game, same performance, just being steady. And I think all those things have set up pretty well for him to the point where he's probably the backup next year or in a tandem spot, depending on how well he plays, because they have him and they have to make a decision on their goaltending. And you look at cap considerations, it seems like a no-brainer. The other thing I'll say about Matt Murray, since we brought him up to start the segment, the number one thing that I took away from that wasn't even just that he has a head injury. And yeah, he's had a concussion history. That's pretty bad, right? Like you worry about his overall well-being at that point. But the fact that Sheldon Keefe also said he's also dealing with other stuff too, just makes me kind of shake my head to the point where it's like, when do you start calling it like an end to the experiment? Because if it's a lot of patchwork to kind of get him into this spot, how effective can he be? Like, it's a lot of band-aiding, it looks like. And, I'm not trying to knock the guy. It sucks if when you get injuries and you become injury prone, and the Leafs have made a calculated risk in this. And, thanks to some shrewd moves with Elias Samsonov, getting him at a 1-year, $1.8 million deal, and Joseph Woll taking this step, you've got to start wondering, even for Murray's overall physical well-being beyond hockey, because, there's the head thing, but then there's the other stuff too. So you wonder how effective he was when he was dealing with the other things. That it just kind of felt like, at what point do you kind of call it? That's kind of where I'm at with this whole thing.
Yeah, I think I'm definitely with you there, and that's going to be an off-season conversation. But for the meantime, if he is dealing with not only the head injury, but as you said, Sheldon Keefe mentioning that he's got other things going on. There's 5 games left before the playoffs. It would seem unlikely that he is going to return, unless there is a bit of a miraculous turnaround. And Joseph Woll is seemingly going to be the guy. I mean, I would be very surprised if Joseph Woll is not the backup for Ilya Samsonov come game 1 against Tampa Bay. Like, we're just running out of time here, I think, for, Matt Murray to get in there. I mean, maybe he's healthy in time. There's still couple of weeks from game number 1, but as you said, I mean, just to get him feeling good and feeling 100%, like, do you want a 70% Matt Murray as the backup if something happens to Ilya Samsonov midway through a game against Tampa Bay? Like, Joseph Woll, maybe it's not the most optimal option, but he's healthy and he's playing well. The confidence seems to be pretty high. I think if you asked anybody right now in Leafs Nation, who do you have more confidence right now as the backup, I think you'd be hard-pressed to find someone that's going to give Matt Murray that vote.
Right. And then the other thing, too, even just as I'm recalling it, remember when he took the warm-up against the Senators the second time and had to pull himself out of the game? And they said at that point he had an ankle injury that that he had been dealing with that flared up. So he had been dealing with that for at least 10 days. Prior to that. And they were still trying to have him work through things to the point where it's like, all right, like, I know the goaltending is deep and there are all these other injuries and stuff, and they've committed what they've committed to in him. But it's almost like you kind of have to start looking at, you don't want to openly admit you've made a mistake here, because there's no mistake if you have other goaltenders who can perform well, right? So, but yeah. It's just at the point where it's like, I just don't feel he's ever going to be fully healthy. It always seems like he's dealing with something even when he's playing. And then that starts to question, the last couple of games where he had let in some bad goals and he said he couldn't get around to it in time, or the wraparound. You wonder, so maybe it's because he was too hurt. He doesn't have the speed to kind of cover the posts. Like, you start to wonder. So I don't know. I think, in my mind, I have nothing to base this on, so don't hold me to it. But I wouldn't be surprised if we saw the last of Matt Murray as a Toronto, like in goal for the Toronto Maple Leafs.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a possibility. It's just, like you said, unfortunate situations when it comes to the injuries. I mean, it's been no fault of his own. I mean, especially the most recent one. Lucas Raymond trips, falls, knocks Matt Murray over, and he's got the headed injury. Like, what are you supposed to do to protect Matt Murray, from something like that when he's not even looking at the play? Yeah. Like, it's, just a freak accident that kind of happens to him there. And there's been a lot of that throughout his career. But, hindsight is 2020, of course, and I think everybody looking back at this move, says, why would you do something like this? This was always, on the table, of course, but there was a stretch where Matt Murray was playing really well, and I don't think people were, thinking about that, because he was giving the Maple Leafs some pretty good minutes in between the pipes, but overall, it just has not worked out. And, of course, we wish him all the best, like you said, and we'll see what happens with his future with the Toronto Maple Leafs and with the sport of hockey. But hopefully he's able to get back at some point to suit up. Maybe it's for the Maple Leafs, maybe it's for another team, but health is of the utmost importance right now for Matt Murray. As we mentioned before, Zach Aston-Reese, the big offensive piece in the Maple Leafs for this game, scoring a pair of goals, I should say, and he's been on a bit of a heater. I know you were tweeting about, trying to come up with a nickname for Zach Aston-Reese, because all he ever does is score on TSN. You went with Tuak TSN Reese, which I think is pretty good.
You know what my mistake was? I do have the ability to edit tweets, and I was thinking of changing that O to a 10 for his 10th of the season.
Oh, that's not bad.
So it would have been Tuak. ATSN 10 Reese, but I don't know. I was just going based on what Steve Dangle did, because he did the ASTSN Reese.
Yeah. So what is it now? 8 goals? 8 of his 10 goals have come on TSN this year, which is Pretty
and TSN
remarkable.
only has a third of the game, so like, of course, like it's just funny.
So it goes to show you just how absurd that goals per TSN rate that Zach Aston-Reese has
and
going
TSN
on.
has
but,
zero
like
playoff
you said,
games, by the way. So,
oh man, so Zach Aston-Reese, sorry buddy, you were going 0 for come playoffs against the Tampa Bay Lightning. But let's hear from the Maple Leaf sniper who says he's just trying to do what's asked of him.
I think it's just like effort and consistency. I know they expect me to be physical and finish hits, and it doesn't have to be blowing up guys every night, but it's just being stiff and aggressive on the puck and getting in front of guys, hitting guys. I think I've been doing that well lately, and I've been moving my feet and skating, and I think all that stuff is just tying into the production, right?
So I'll admit, I mean, coming into the final month or two of the regular season, with the way Bobby McMahon was playing down with the Marlies, with all the anticipation of Matthew Nyes, Zach Aston-Reese was probably the odd man out for me. But at this point, and I tweeted it, like, how can you take this guy out of the lineup? Like, he's doing everything you're asking of him. He's not going to score 2 goals every other game or, score at the rate he's doing right now, even though, in the past we've seen him be able to, have this type of offensive ability. But, like I said, with everything that he's doing, you're trying to reward people that, are playing the way that you want and are being productive. Right now, I mean, I think he's in pen for game number 1 against the Tampa Bay Lightning.
Yeah, so like so I asked that question, and then I also asked Keith afterwards about Zach Aston-Reese if his play and some of the bottom 6 play is kind of making you change your mind about 11-7 and 12-6, only because when you go back to March 2nd, when the Leafs went 11-7 for the very first time, and then again on March 4th, when they had a fully healthy forward lineup, Zach Aston-Reese was the scratch for both of those. They had O'Reilly in at that point, and of course O'Reilly's going to come back at some point again as well, though now it's a pretty easy, Abruzzese comes out if they go 12, right? But if they go 11, it wasn't so obvious. Zach Aston-Reese was the odd man out. Injuries occurred, Aston-Reese gets back in, and they can still do 11-7 with Aston-Reese in there. But with everybody healthy now, it really kind of makes you wonder, because if he's gearing up at the right spot, if you want to go 11-7, who are you taking out at that point? I don't see an obvious candidate. Noel Acciari just came back. David Kampf is kind of ramping up pretty well. Sam Lafferty's been all right. Maybe it's Lafferty, but I just don't see it. So it's a tough one. And so I think as long as Aston-Reese continues to play as well as he does and everyone else in the bottom 6 is all right, then I think it's going to force the traditional 12-6 to start. Of course, injuries can kind of change that, as it has. But I think Aston-Reese, his performance personally is the key to the Leafs kind of sticking with 12-6 with everybody healthy.
Yeah, and I think even if he does start a game 1, you're not locking Zach Aston-Reese into a spot and saying, no matter what happens, we're going to keep going with him. Like, he's going to get game number 1, and then if it's good or bad, then, there's other guys that can step in. But, this definitely muddies the situation, I would say, for, as you said, guys like Sam Lafferty, even David Kampf, who I know they like, of course, and, Matthew Nyes, who we touched on before and still has yet to make his NHL debut. But I think a lot of people are, sort of penciling him into a potential playoff spot, which
I don't.
Which you may not, but I'm saying other people are. There's a reason that they, made that cap move in that space to be able to sign him to a deal and left that one contract
I think they
spot.
want him available for sure, and the way everything's circumstance-wise works out, that he'll get some games at the end of the regular season. But I don't think that's going to be enough unless he's like an absolute fire engine out there and he's just flying and outpacing everybody with his hockey IQ. I don't see a situation where he's going to beat out anybody, at least early on. If injuries start to occur and they need bodies, absolutely. But I mean, I don't see it right now, him making that kind of jump where he's just going to be absolutely for sure in there. It's a tricky situation for sure.
Yeah, it's a spot where they've got a lot of guys and not enough positions when it comes to the playoff roster, especially if they go 11-7. But yeah, it's nice to have the bottom six definitely performing the way they are right now, and we'll get to Alex Kerfoot coming up. But in the meantime, the Maple Leafs showed off some not new combinations because we've seen them in spurts before, but it was interesting to see the top six tonight where you had Michael Bunting, Austin Matthews, and Kalle Järnkrok, and then you had Mitch Marner, William Nylander, and John Tavares, which is an interesting trio, of course. And I thought first period took them a while to get going, and then in the final 40 minutes they definitely had things going their way, even though they were not able to put the puck in the net. But definitely a scary situation for Mitch Marner in the middle of this game where he got stepped on the back of his leg, sort of the hamstring area. I think it was Kent Johnson of the Columbus Blue Jackets, and immediately you thought, oh no, this does not look good. But Marner spoke about what he felt and saw in that moment.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, he's not meaning to do it at all. It's a scary incident there, and yeah, I mean, right away it just felt weird. Didn't know really what it was. Assumed it was a skate, but yeah, obviously when I got back, I just asked our trainers there if there was a cut or anything. Didn't feel like there was a cut, so pretty lucky, but definitely a freak little incident there.
Do you wear protective mesh at all down there?
Now you're looking at it. I mean, this is I got the cut-proof stuff on my wrist, but not on my legs or anything down there. It's, like I said, maybe I was lucky. It just wasn't a heavy guy, and it was a bit of a free play there, but luckily enough, nothing came out of it.
Yeah, that was pretty frightening, like I said. And, this is sort of the danger when you've got things locked up and there's only a few games remaining. You wish you could just bubble wrap every single guy and treat it like basketball where, you don't have to play everyone and you just run a 7-man rotation and you keep your all-stars out of the lineup. But that's not how hockey works. And, these guys obviously want to get into games before the playoffs. But that's just one of those freak things. And luckily for Marner, he came away unscathed.
It's one of those things where, there's going to be risks. There's going to be those things. And it's on the flip side of that. And we didn't share the clip on the pod, but he was asked about being part of that rotation where he didn't play the other night. And he didn't necessarily sound enthused about that decision, kind of saying that, he said, he would kind of rather play. But they employ people with science, sports science, all that other stuff that kind of help in making these decisions. And so, he went along with the decision. And so it's kind of funny because you go from that situation to this potential disaster that was averted, right? And you wonder if maybe going through those kind of things at this point of the season, he starts to kind of have a second thought about it. But that question came after that Johnson cut, and he was like, no, he's a competitor. He still would have rather play. And, watching that game in Ottawa, I thought that was one of his worst games, that I thought it was a good decision for him to rest. But, these competitors, you're going to have to pull him out kicking and screaming. That's I'm not saying he kicked or screamed, but I'm just using it as a metaphor in talking about the passion that Mitch Marner has to want to continue to stay in the lineup, despite obvious risks like we saw as a potential one in the Kent Johnson situation there.
Yeah, guys are going to potentially get hurt in any situation. It could be the most mundane thing that causes an injury. It doesn't have to be, a skate cut or something. Sometimes you just take a weird fall or a weird bump and all of a sudden you're not feeling 100%. So luckily, there's only 5 games remaining for the Maple Leafs in the regular season, and I imagine we're going to see a little bit more of the load management before everything is done here with the 82 games. But luckily for Mitch Marner, as we said, escaped a serious injury there, and we'll see what happens for him moving forward. But that trio, like I said, definitely picked things up in the final 40 minutes of this one. We know Sheldon Keefe has been trying all different kind of combinations, and Ryan O'Reilly continues to be the X factor here. When he comes back, it'll be interesting to see where he all kind of fits in. But what do you think the thinking is behind those 3 guys and having them in a game like this?
You really haven't seen anything done like this before, except in situational circumstances, like late in the period, Sheldon Keefe has kind of been known to overload lines like that with 3 of his core 4 guys, or if they're down or whatever, that I think he just thought, you know what, against an opponent like this, let's see if we can kind of overload and do something where you kind of build out this advantage early and it works out. And so it's the exact opposite of what they've done in situations with Ryan O'Reilly, where they've used him as a situation to kind of go spread in the offense with like different core or top guys on different lines. So I think that's essentially what it was. I don't think it's anything that they're necessarily going to do for long stretches against Tampa. I do think they need to kind of spread out matchups, but maybe in this situation, if Tampa deploys something where it kind of makes sense to go with 3 guys like that, they can do it. And so getting a full sense of how they can handle a full game is a good data. I think that's really what it comes down to. I don't see a situation where they're necessarily going to kind of look to it. But as Ryan O'Reilly comes back, maybe they feel like they can, because Ryan O'Reilly has some established chemistry with someone like a Nola Chari and guys who can move over to the wing in that spot, and they get him adjusted that way. So I'm not exactly sure, but it'll be very interesting to see what they do there. I don't think it's something necessarily long-term, but based on the expected goals after they kind of got going, it looked like something that could potentially work. But I think you also saw it as a detriment to that first line, because that first line with Bunting and Yarncroke together didn't seem to really have the same type of jam.
All right, coming up on Rink-Wide Toronto, we will get to the Bodog line of the day as Alex Kerfoot continues to score goals. He went forever without scoring goals. Now he can't stop putting the puck in the back of the net. And we'll also talk about the Maple Leafs Pride Night, the annual Pride Night down at Scotiabank Arena, as the Leafs pick up the 4-2 win over the Columbus Blue Jackets. You're listening to Rink-Wide Toronto, sponsored by Bodog, free casino games and sports odds. It is time to play at bodog.net. It's Rink-Wide Toronto, pregame, postgame, every game. It is Rink-Wide Toronto, sponsored by Bodog, the place to play free casino games and get the latest sports odds. Rob Wong, joined alongside by David Alter from Scotiabank Arena. The Maple Leafs getting the 4-2 victory over the Columbus Blue Jackets tonight as they move to 6 points clear of the Tampa Bay Lightning for second place in the Atlantic Division, trying to lock down home ice advantage. They finally played that second game in hand, so the Leafs and Lightning have now played 77 games on the season, 5 remaining, including 1 against the Lightning coming up in the final week of the season. So that should be an interesting one, and hopefully for the Leafs, there is nothing to play for when those two teams meet in a week or so. But let's get to the Bodog line of the day, and Alex Kerfoot coming into this one tonight, Dave, plus 270 to score a goal, and ho-hum, he did it again. Alex Kerfoot has found the scoring touch of late for whatever reason after many, many games where he just did not have any sort of puck luck. He's been putting the puck in the back of the net now. Is he all of a sudden finding things offensively for this Maple Leafs team?
Look, it's perhaps the regression to the mean in the positive direction. I probably should have worded that differently, but I think you know what I mean, right? Like it's the progression to the mean. There we go. So he had a lot of chances and he just wasn't kind of burying it, and probably should have had more. And so now he's kind of getting them, and good for him, because, you know, if he's going to test the market, the numbers are certainly something that teams are going to look at, right? So when you're in that USA year and you're not producing offensively, it can kind of get to you in terms of figuring out where you're going to, you know, make your next contract. And so, I think for him, ramping up at this right time is exactly what he needs so that he feels good about himself going into the playoffs. My concern with Alex Kerfoot this season was, even though he was consistently staying in the lineup and the team was getting results, he still kind of seemed down about his play. And I don't know if that was a motivating factor for him, or just kind of something he would do all the time, but he just kind of seemed to be really down about it. And, he just couldn't quite change that narrative. So for him to get these results, I think that's just going to be a good thing for his confidence going into this playoff series. And I think he needs that. He carries a lot of the weight of what happened in game 6 with the calls and where the Leafs were in that game. And so for him to kind of just move on from a lot of those things and playing his best hockey will only serve not only him, but the Toronto Maple Leafs going forward into a series where he can really atone for what took place last year.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I'm always rooting for the guy. I know he takes a lot of heat from the fan base for lack of goal scoring, and even going back to last year with that tough penalty in Game 6 against Victor Hedman on the penalty kill. But he's a guy that works his butt off. He's always, trying his hardest out there, and I think it would just be a pretty cool moment if Alex Kerfoot can get a big goal for the Maple Leafs come playoff time. But he's, one of the coach's favorites, of course. We know Sheldon Keefe loves to use him in all different kind of situations, and anytime he needs a stabilizer, right? That's what he's called Alex Kerfoot in the past. He, can stick him on the first line, the second line, the third line, or the fourth line, and wherever you put him, he's definitely going to be an effective player out there. But it's nice to see the goal scoring coming around for him as well, as he pots his 10th of the season tonight in this victory against the Columbus Blue Jackets. Meanwhile, the Maple Leafs held their annual Pride Nights, and they were wearing helmet decals, rainbow tape, and some t-shirts that were made up for the festivities, of course. They do not have a special warm-up jerseys. They've never worn that in the past. I know that was put out there today on social media, and some people were, sort of confused because we've seen that around the league, of course, Dave, and a lot of controversy surrounding some other teams around the NHL. But if there's one team that definitely, takes a lot of, no pun intended, but a lot of pride in Pride Night, it is the Maple Leafs, of course. Kyle Dubas, Morgan Riley, two people that have taken part in the Pride Parade in Toronto before. Like, this is an initiative that this franchise takes very seriously.
Yeah, Michael Bunting was also there this past summer that I remember. Brendan Shanahan was there as well. They've always done that. And so, there's a lot of social media discourse. Like, there really is. It's hard to kind of please everybody in this situation. But the one thing without a doubt is that they have not had this jersey before, and they were kind of put into the spot where, they didn't do it this year. And I don't think there was anything for them to gain by doing it this year, just given the climate with Russia and everything like that. And then, of course, tonight, the big story was Ilya Samsonov did not wear the decal on his mask during warmups, where everyone else had that on. The Leafs communication staff kind of let us know what their plan was going into the day. And Samsonov, who's worn a Pride jersey before and has no personal views about it, had made it clear to the team. And Mark Fraser did an interview on TSN pregame about this as well. He's the one in charge of inclusion, former Maple Leaf player, and of inclusion and diversity, I should say, mentioned that, this anti-LGBTQ plus rule that was put in last year, December of 2022, like in Russia, this law has kind of put Russians in a bit of a difficult spot, where some don't feel as safe, where anything that's kind of posted outwardly, and they have family back home, which Samsonov does, kind of puts the family at risk, and they don't want to, I guess, quote unquote, poke the bear, right? Like, you can do all these things that show support. And so I think the Leafs did as good of a job handling this as they possibly could have. And I'll explain why. Because, they had the benefit of the doubt with everything that they've done. And they've never had the Pride jerseys, which is also true. They could have easily not done the decal as well. have the pride tape, and then someone like Samsonov wouldn't have been pointed out if nobody had the decal. But they actually came out in front and did their best to explain the situation there. And I know that's not going to please a lot of people. My parents are from the former Soviet Union. I can kind of get it from a personal standpoint of what Ilya Samsonov is kind of going through there, and political beliefs aside. When your home country and you have family members there are putting this harsh law that went in December of 2022. And I wrote about it and I linked to the story at the Hockey News. It really does kind of put a lot of murkiness into the situation where it's kind of hard. The James Reimer situations and the religious belief, reasons are one thing, but this is when it comes down to safety and, who are we to kind of really judge in that? That's my belief on this situation. I know it's not going to please everybody, but I think the Leafs handled this as best as they possibly could, given everything.
Yeah, I think you make a good point there that, it's not the easy situation to have to confront. There's a lot of nuance to it, and Ilya Samsonov is, trying to do what he thinks is best for his family. And like you said, it may not, please everyone out there, but it is a sensitive situation for him and some other people involved, of course. But, overall, like I said, the Maple Leafs always do a great job with this. It hasn't been the case around the NHL this year with some of the situations that we've seen, but the Leafs definitely with a great initiative that they do every season. Just like you said, a guy like Mark Frazier, you look beyond that. I know they put out a video with Megan Duggan, who spoke with the team earlier this year about the Pride Night festivities and everything that goes into it. It's a very emotional video for people that haven't seen it. It was really something special, but I think that's great. That the Leafs are constantly doing these things, whether it's Pride Night or the Indigenous Night that they had earlier this season, and bringing their players into these meetings and really explaining to them what this means for those communities. Because I feel not that other teams don't do these types of things. I'm sure they do, and we don't necessarily see them. But if there's one organization that takes these matters very seriously, it is the Toronto Maple Leafs. And you see it all the time with all the different initiatives that they do outside of the game and all over the city. Like, this is something that they definitely care about, that it's more than just hockey. It's about the fans of the game and trying to bring more people into the game. And, the Leafs, you have to applaud them because they definitely do a lot of great things around the city.
And I think they've learned their lesson when it comes to due diligence and stuff and image of the type of people that they're bringing into their franchise. Like, remember in the summer of 2021, they initially hired Dusty Emu to be a goaltending coach with the Marlies. And then it wasn't until afterwards that they went into his Twitter account that they realized there were some kind of anti-messaging there that they had not been aware about, and they rescinded it immediately. Like, they did in the end what they felt was right after a transgression and missing his personal beliefs that had been put on social media. So I truly feel that when they do make these decisions with players and stuff, they look at these character decisions now before bringing someone on. And so I think the benefit of the doubt has to be given in that situation following that incident, especially with someone like Ilya Samsonov and some of the other political stuff. And when they say that, he believes in inclusion, it's just, there's this real risk that's going on. I think you have to take them at face value.
Yeah, I think you're right there. It's a difficult situation with everything going on with Russia. And like we said, Ilya Samsonov, got ahead of it, and so did the Maple Leafs, and they tried to handle a very sensitive situation as best as they could. And that's the decision that they made in this case. Just got a couple minutes left here, of course. Looking ahead to Thursday, I would say it's a big game against Boston, only because it's been a while since we've seen these two teams face off. The last time, of course, was a pretty ugly one for the Maple Leafs as they lost 5-2 against the Bruins. But, two teams here kind of just trying to make sure they're healthy getting into the playoffs. I don't know if we're necessarily going to see, some rough stuff, some physicality, but, anytime they square off, there always seems to be some fireworks, especially when the Leafs head down to Boston to take.
Yeah, I think it's going to come down to roster flexibility with both of these teams, really. If Boston has more flexibility to rest more guys than the Leafs do, then I think you're going to see a lot of Bruins players that are just going to want to try to force the issue and help their team in more ways than one. So it's not like these type of games are with zero risk. Like, I do feel like, tempers can eventually erupt. Like, players are going to be competitive no matter who it is. So I think it's just going to be a matter of that. So, yeah, I think they have to kind of just be careful, responsible, not let things get carried away. Michael Bunting, who, a lot of people said recently getting the Nazem Kadri treatment with the penalties and stuff. I think he did a great job tonight of just looking the other way when Boone Jenner was yelling at him and stuff. So I think, that's really going to be tested in that game against the Bruins to make sure that everyone's kind of on their best behavior. Because I feel like the Bruins who get maybe the perceived benefit of the doubt in a lot of these situations, like Brad Marchand is an excellent example of that. If he's in that lineup, then you really wonder. But outside of that, yeah, I can't imagine you're going to see 100 minutes in total penalties. Like, I just don't see that situation happening.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned the Michael Bunting face wash that he got there from Boone Jenner. I was thinking, man, it's pretty rare that you see Michael Bunting take the face wash and, like, he doesn't respond, but he was like, you know what? I'm just not going to do that this time. It's what we wrote about. It's not worth it. It's what we wrote about. Just, like, if he wants to show it differently, he's got to not react. Like, if he wants to change the perception of him, he's got to not react in those moments. It's a tough ask, but that's what you have to do in order to get into the good books with the officials and not willingly or unwillingly put yourself at risk to the team by taking a penalty, whether it was deserving or not. Yeah, and look, he very easily could have embellished it, threw the head back when he was getting the face wash, but Boone Jenner was just kind of rubbing his head, and the helmet was like all over the place, and he was just like smiling, and I was like, all right, whatever. This, I guess, is what I gotta do to get back in the good books. I gotta take a face wash from the Blue Jackets captain, and try not to take a retaliation penalty here and even things up. But come playoff time, I'm feeling like Michael Bunting is going to be back to doing Michael Bunting things, as he said. That's just who he is, and that's how he plays the game. But you got to pick your spots. I think that's really what he has to figure out here. That can't always be that way. There's times for it, and there's times where you don't have to play that way. And hopefully he can figure out that balance before the playoffs begin, coming up in a few weeks' time. But that'll do it for this edition of Rink Wide Toronto. We'll be back on Thursday nights when the Maple Leafs head off to Boston to take on the Bruins. Make sure to like, review, subscribe to the pod wherever you get your favorite pods. You can follow us on Twitter, RinkWideTOR, @DeAlter, @RobWong34, and you can get the podcast at RinkWideToronto.com. For David Alter and producer Aaron, I'm Rob Wong. You've been listening to Rink Wide Toronto, sponsored by Bodog, Canada's home for casino games and sports odds, where everyone goes to play. It is Rink Wide Toronto, pregame, postgame, every game.